The Bible says mankind's first home was a garden paradise called Eden. God created Adam and Eve to tend the garden. He warned them never to eat from the tree of knowledge. One day, a serpent hissed a jealous message to Eve. If you eat the forbidden fruit, you will become as wise as your Creator. Woman and man succumbed to temptation. God feared his creations would next eat from the tree of life. He cast Adam and Eve from the garden and gave mankind a legacy of earthly toil. There's another legacy, a longing to rediscover the place where it all began. Far from the great cities of the ancient world lies a desert island. In the remote interior of the island, only sparse brush grows, and a great solitary tree. No water flows here, but the tree has existed as long as anyone remembers. The people who live on the island say it is the tree of life.
This series presents information based in part on theory and conjecture. The producer's purpose is to suggest some possible explanation, but not necessarily the only one to the mysteries we will examine.
The dawn of civilization is thought to have occurred in that part of the world we now call the Middle East. The great pyramids of Egypt have endured nearly 5,000 years. In the epic journey of mankind, however, they are relatively recent milestones. The builders of the pyramids grappled with the same question that puzzles modern men. Where did it all begin? One answer lies in the Judeo-Christian tradition of an earthly paradise that existed somewhere in the Middle East.
Biblical scholars have devoted lifetimes to interpreting the section of Genesis which describes the location of Eden. A passage in the Old Testament states that Eden was watered by a stream which rose out of the garden and branched out into 4 rivers: the Tigris, Euphrates, Pishon, and Gihon. The Tigris and Euphrates are familiar enough. But what are the Pishon and Gihon? Where are they in the modern world?
The great river of Egypt is the Nile, thought by some to be the Gihon of Genesis. There would be no city of Cairo without the Nile, only desert. To the ancients, the river was a god. All their great monuments and temples were built near its banks. The obelisk at Karnak took nearly a decade to quarry, transport, and erect. The holiest of monuments here was not stone, however. It was the sacred pool, symbol of life in the desert. Water is a recurrent theme in all accounts of mankind's beginnings. If we assume that the Nile is the western boundary of the search for Eden, it is to the rising sun that we must look for clues to the location of the 4th river. East of Karnak is the Red Sea, separating Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. Freighters and tankers have recently inundated these waters, but the coast of Arabia is no stranger to commerce. Jeddah is the major seaport, bustling with the enormous wealth Arab oil has brought. Modern office buildings are rising from the arid soil rapidly crowding out the ramshackle structures of an earlier, quieter time. Jeddah is the Arabic word for grandmother, and although the city is the gateway to the holiest shrines of Islam, it has great significance to Christians and Jews as well. A rubble-strewn plot of ground is all that remains of a great Christian shrine destroyed by Muslim zealots in 1928. The shrine marked the legendary tomb of Eve, grandmother of humanity. The burden of their fall from grace weighed heavily on Adam and Eve. Tradition has it they separated when they were cast out from Eden. Eve made her way across the desert to the place that is her namesake, Jeddah. There, she died. Of all the modern Arab states, Arabia clings most tenaciously to its past. It is the land of Muhammad, and long before him, the great Jewish king Solomon mined gold here. Legends are not easily dismissed in a place with such a rich history. Arabia is a land of seeming contradictions. Gasoline is virtually free, but water is sold for 25 cents a glass. Part of the price, perhaps, for Eve's temptation. Men are taught that toil was the legacy of Adam and Eve's fall. The same tradition which says Eve wandered in the desert says Adam struggled in the Judean wilderness. In Judea, nomads still tend their flocks in the hills above the Dead Sea. Beyond the wilderness is Jerusalem, where the old ways are honored as they are in Jeddah. Pious Jews chant prayers at a wall built 2,000 years ago by Herod. Near this sacred and ancient place, Adam is said to have emerged from the wilderness. A beautiful mosque stands above Herod's wall. It is among the most sacred shrines of the Muslim faith. The delicate Arabic script inlaid in tile is from the Quran. It tells of Muhammad's struggle to return mankind to the purity Eden represents to all faiths. The great dome of the mosque vaults an ancient place with immense religious significance. On an ancient rock, Abraham is said to have offered to sacrifice his son. Muhammad is believed to have stepped from the rock into heaven. It is also the place, one tradition says, where Adam returned to die. The persistent question remains, where is the fourth river mentioned in Genesis? The traditional resting places of Adam and Eve are east of the Nile. East of Jeddah and Jerusalem are the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In the second millennium before Christ, that part of the world watered by the two rivers was ruled by the Assyrians. They were searching for paradise too, and may have found it in the great gulf where the Tigris and Euphrates empty.
I am Ashurbanipal, king of the Assyrians. My legions are the most powerful on earth. From Mesopotamia, we strike west into Egypt, and south into the Gulf of Araby. There's great wealth in the Gulf, wealth to feed my armies. But there's more. Stories of a place called Dilmun. It's said that no one dies there, and the natives pluck pearls from the ocean like dates from a palm. If there is such a place, it shall be mine.
Into the Gulf, Ashurbanipal sent advance elements of his army. The scouts returned with incredible reports. It seemed there was a land called Dilmun. The inhabitants did pluck pearls from the ocean like dates from a palm. Flowers bloomed, scenting the air with their perfume. The date palms were heavy with fruit. Ashurbanipal's men had never seen such abundance. Everywhere there was greenery, lush and inviting. On a Dilmun seal, a tree flanked by two mysterious figures. The record of Ashurbanipal's expedition gives us one of the earliest indications that Adam and Eve's garden might have existed, might still exist. Thus, the key to finding Eden and the fourth river of Genesis may lie in finding Dilmun, somewhere in the Persian Gulf. To understand the Middle East, one must study the sea. Long before the ancient Phoenicians were probing the Mediterranean from their harbors in modern-day Lebanon, the great ocean gulf separating Arabia from Persia was already alive with commerce. The same tools and techniques that built ancient sailing ships are still in use today. Nautical craftsmanship has been handed down through 100 generations. With little more than a saw and their memories, these men build the sturdy boats that sail the Gulf. From Arabia in the west come ships laden with date wine and spun cotton. From Persian cities in the east, the ships return with exotic vegetables and spices from India. Many nations have claimed the Gulf as their own. One place has seen them all come and move on. Bahrain is a small island off the east coast of Arabia. Its people have enjoyed an influence far beyond their numbers or the size of their homeland. Through Bahrain's seaport at Manama City flows the wealth of the Gulf. The islands have been independent only since 1971. Before that, Bahrain was a British protectorate. Before that, it was Persian. Before that, Portuguese. Many nations have ruled Bahrain, but she has always retained an exotic individuality. Perhaps nowhere else in the Arab world is there a stronger work ethic. The day begins early. By noon, it is too hot to work. Breakfast may be fresh Arab bread. A bitter green coffee is ritually shared by merchants preparing for the day. By 5 a.m., the vegetable market is ready for business. Each vendor is a specialist, selling melon from Egypt, citrus from Lebanon, or lush homegrown produce. The merchants squat in the dust, ready to bargain. It has been this way for thousands of years. Bahrain has a resiliency that allows old and new to exist in harmony. A modern refinery turns Saudi Arabian oil into gasoline. The Bahrainis have little oil themselves. They do have the ability to exploit a good thing when they see it. By being invaluable to bigger, more powerful neighbors, Bahrain assures its unique place in the world. The pulse of the Gulf may well be the rush of oil through pipelines, but oil plays no part in Genesis. Water is the fluid of Eden, nectar of the desert. To keep decorative trees alive under Bahrain's brutal sun, they must be watered daily. Water is Bahrain's secret. The potter's kiln is built into a huge rock mound that may tell much about Bahrain's special relationship with water. There are dozens of the large mounds on the island. Archaeologist P.B. Cornwall was the first to recognize their significance. In 1940, he dug into one of the mounds and discovered that it was a tomb, probably a royal tomb, and probably older than the Great Pyramid at Giza. 5,000 years older than the modern graveyard at its base. There are perhaps 50,000 smaller mounds on the island, most of them long since looted. They tell us that the ancient population of Bahrain was large and affluent, rich enough to accord death a status surpassed only by the pharaohs of Egypt. And they place this lost civilization in the same millennium as the Assyrian domination of the north. When King Ashurbanipal sent his men to find Dilmun, they returned with reports of a civilization that defied death. Near an oasis is the ghost of a much later military expedition. In the 16th century, the Portuguese invaded Bahrain and built a fort to protect their trade route to the Far East. Without realizing it, the invaders were building on the ruins of a civilization that had dominated the same trade routes long before their Portuguese ancestors had ever put to sea. The first major excavation of the site was begun in 1953 by Professor Geoffrey Bibby. It revealed a sophisticated dwelling, complete with what appears to be an altar. More intriguing was the discovery of a limestone basin, which probably held fresh water. The reservoir fed into a walled channel built 20 feet below the surface of the ground, clearly an advanced irrigation system. The underground water supply could be tapped from well-like chimneys constructed along the course of the channel. Bibby thought they probably served the additional function of allowing silt deposits to be removed from the waterway. Dozens of the stone chimneys appear in the desert at intervals of about 100 yards. Fresh water remains abundant elsewhere on the island, welling up from the ground to fill natural rock basins. Bahrain is surrounded by the salt waters of the Gulf. The sea is absorbed into the limestone bedrock of the island and percolates upward in a natural filtration process. The result is the most wonderful of all things in the desert, a miracle, an oasis. If we are to believe Genesis, then Adam and Eve must have frolicked in just such a place. Perhaps we have found the fourth river, which the Bible says takes us to Eden. It may very well be the great river flowing beneath Bahrain. Where there is water in Bahrain, the desert explodes with life and color. If we take Genesis as a mixture of revelation and allegory, then it is likely the author had a real place in mind when he described Eden. He might have been familiar with the Sumerian legend of the semi-divine king named Gilgamesh. In search of immortality, Gilgamesh travels to the land of Dilmun. There, Gilgamesh learns that he must pursue the flower of immortality, which is found at the bottom of the sea. By eating the flower, Gilgamesh will become immortal. The story doesn't end happily. A serpent appears, steals the flower, and eats it. Man's old adversary once again robs him of everlasting life. The biblical similarities are obvious. There is more, however. The flower of immortality at the bottom of the sea could be a figure of speech for the pearls Bahrain is famous for. The ancient inhabitants of Bahrain had a peculiar custom. In their burial mounds, they placed a basket. Inside the basket, they placed a snake and a symbolic pearl. On Bahrain, as in Genesis, the garden gives way to desert. Few creatures willingly leave the oasis to take their chances in the wilderness just beyond the last blade of grass. Adam and Eve had a choice. They chose knowledge instead of life and were cast out. Mankind's prospects seemed bleak as the interior of Bahrain. If there's a single lesson to be learned from the great faiths, however, perhaps it is hope. The tree of life may not be lost forever. In one last astonishing parallel to the biblical Eden, we find a great tree growing in the Bahrain waste. It seems to thrive where nothing else can. Its shade beckons across the sun-hated desert floor. Few of the people who live on this island have ever heard of the Garden of Eden, yet they call this the Tree of Life. If we never again achieve the garden, it will certainly not be because we lost our way in our dreams. There is intense curiosity among a handful of scholars and scientists who know that the real story of Bahrain hasn't been told. Money for archaeological work is always scarce, and what there is of it is more likely to be spent on glamour digs in Egypt. Those who work here do so out of deep commitment. Piecing together a lost civilization is not as easy as piecing together a pot. Time may be running out. Saudi Arabia plans to build a causeway from the mainland to Bahrain. It will cut through thousands of Dilmun burial mounds. It would be tragic to lose the Garden of Eden a second time. Lost civilizations, extraterrestrials, myths and monsters, missing persons, magic and witchcraft, unexplained phenomena. In search of cameras are traveling the world, seeking out these great mysteries. This program was the result of the work of scientists, researchers, and a group of highly skilled technicians.